I come from. So if we're taught we are machines made of molecules in competition with each other for survival, then our goals will reflect that mentality. On the other hand, if we think we're we're all beings of pure consciousness, we're not just machines made of molecules in competition with each other for survival, then I think we get a different set of values and goals. If we see ourselves as machines made of molecules in competition with each other for survival, then we'll try to produce and consume as many material things as we can and destroy our planet in the process. We'll poison the air, poison the land, poison the water, destroy the forest, drive different species to extinction. And not only that, because we're taught we're machines made of molecules in competition with each other for survival, we'll tend to see conflict on all levels of human society, conflict among individuals, conflict among races, conflict among classes, conflict among nations, conflict among religions even. And it can all be traced back to the mentality that we have, our sense of identity. If we identify ourselves as machines made of molecules in competition with each other for survival, that's the type of world we'll get. If, on the other hand, we see ourselves as beings of pure consciousness who have some higher needs beyond the production and consumption of more and more material things, then we'll try to lead our lives in the most simple, natural, and efficient way possible. We'll be able to live sustainably on this planet. There won't be financial crises because people won't be gaming the system to try to get more than they actually deserve from their fellow men. We'll also see reduction in the levels of conflict. We'll see reduction in the levels of the environmental crisis. But it can all be traced back to the answers to these fundamental questions. Who am I? Where did I come from? I think you're right, Rahasya. Because of the influence of the ideas of Charles Darwin, these ideas such as this idea that we're machines made of matter in competition with each other for survival have become very dominant in society today, and that's become reflected in the kinds of goals that we see people setting for themselves individually and collectively. To change that, you've got to go back to the root ideas, which is what I'm trying to do, get people to see that they are not just machines made of molecules, they are beings of pure consciousness, and they should be trying to return their consciousness to its original pure state.
You know, something that's been going on here about the last 80 or 90 years, sociologists have started really studying society, and they're starting to realize that society has polarized itself, actually even from the Civil War time, but with women's rights and with racial rights and equality, it has tended to polarize our society, and the generation right now that has grown up into that polarized society are thinking more polarized. And this is where your knowledge filter comes in, because we tend to get into groups. And like Richard Dawkins is a good example. I think he's a knee-jerk reaction to some of the extreme fundamentalist religious views. And as such, he has filtered out all of the energetic landscape in between. People like Sam Harris actually is open to that, meditation and the more etheric bodies possibly being part of this. But we tend to, and this came up, I wrote a book about the social and neurological consequences of belief systems, because it seems like belief systems have really been an enemy at suppressing, compartmentalizing, and putting us into conflict with other belief systems, not knowing that once they get involved egotistically, once your ego gets locked into a belief system, it tends to filter out anything that doesn't support that previously held belief.
Yeah, knowledge filtration is a concept I came up with when I was writing and researching the book Forbidden Archaeology with my colleague Richard Thompson. And we began to see that actually there's a lot of evidence for extreme human antiquity, evidence that humans like us have been present on Earth for many, many millions of years. But because that goes against the dominant theories in the academic and scientific world today, the evidence for this tends to be ignored. There are many scientists, archaeologists, geologists, and paleontologists who have discovered human bones, human artifacts, human footprints, many millions of years old, and these things are reported in the professional scientific literature and what I would call the primary scientific literature, the original reports published in professional scientific journals. But they don't make their way into the textbooks because of what I called, and you are also calling, this process of knowledge filtration. And it also operates in the field of consciousness studies and research into what some might call the paranormal. Uh, People tend to think, well, science is materialistic. They tend to think that science is opposed to what we might call spirituality and non material things. But that's because the information that people are being presented with in the science textbooks today has filtered out all the discoveries made by scientists who have investigated uh, things that show, well, there is something more than ordinary matter. There is an independent conscious self that can exist apart from matter. For example, every physics student learns about the work of Pierre and Marie Curie. They were husband and wife. They both got Nobel Prizes for their work in discovering radium and things related to that. And that's in every high school physics textbooks. But what you don't read in the textbooks is that they were heavily involved in psychical research. They were doing experiments with mediums with psychokinetic abilities. They were part of a group of 20 prominent European scientists who were conducting such research in Paris early in the 20th century. For example, the group did 2 years of research with the Italian medium Eusapia Palladino, a woman who had some psychokinetic abilities. And these experiments took place in the Psychology Institute in Paris, not in somebody's dark living room, which is the normal conception of what was going on. So one day they had the medium in the laboratory sitting in a chair. Marie Curie was holding her hands. Other scientists were holding her feet to make sure she wasn't moving at all. And in the middle of the lab, in broad daylight, under what he called perfect conditions of observation, Pierre Curie, the Nobel Prize winning physicist, said he saw a large table floating about 3 feet off the ground in the presence of this woman. So, after 2 years of experiments like this, the entire group of scientists, including 5 Nobel Prize winners, signed a document saying these things are absolutely true and we have to take them into account if we're going to have a complete picture of reality. But you're not going to read about that in the physics textbooks today, even though it's part of the actual history of physics, because of this process of knowledge filtration. And that's just one of many examples I
Do,
could give.
do you think some of the reason for that is because of funding and grants, like from the Rockefeller Foundation? It seems like a lot of archaeologists that they're actually secular archaeologists and paleontologists and biologists, but they have to be careful of funding on how they report things.
Yes, that's part of the reason for the knowledge filtering process. In one sense, it's just human nature. For example, if I love somebody and someone tells me something bad about the person I love, I don't want to believe it. I won't believe it. I may even become angry at the person who tells me. So today, many scientists are very much in love with their theories. And the reason they're in love with them is they think they're uh, better than a lot of the ideas that came from different fundamentalist sects and things like that in the past. They had the example of Galileo, being suppressed by the church and things like that. So they think they've got some really good ideas that they're very much in love with, and therefore when they hear something that contradicts it, they just don't want to believe it. They tend to reject it out of hand simply because it's going against the dominant theories that they so much love today. But there is another reason, I think you stumbled upon it, and that is that there's kind of an institutional support, commitment to these theories that uh, makes it almost impossible for somebody who's trying to make a career within those institutional frameworks to go against these theories that have become so deeply rooted in the educational and scientific institutions. Actually, they don't. Even though there are a few scientists who are exploring alternatives to the current theories, like intelligent design and things like that, they've managed to get these things completely excluded from the scientific institutions and the education system by law, which has the effect of delegitimizing them. So that if you're a student trying to make your way through these educational institutions with the idea of having a career in the scientific and academic institutions, you learn to stay away from these things, not speak about them, not become identified with them, because they've been thoroughly delegitimized by this process of exclusion by law from the education systems. For example, let's say there was a small political party that you like their ideas, maybe a Green Party or something like that. They're not going to win the election in terms of dominating the Congress or anything like that. But you might say, well, I like the Green Party and I like their ideas, and therefore I'm going to vote for their candidate, even though I know he probably won't become president. He or she might not become president of the United States and get a majority in Congress. But because I like their ideas, I'll go along with it. But if that party is outlawed, by the government, then you can't do that. Uh, your freedom of choice is thus restricted. So I think it's a lot like that with these scientific ideas today. A lot of the alternatives to the standard materialistic theories have been outlawed in the education system. They've been so thoroughly delegitimized, by the powers that be, that no one who wants to be part of the system will dare identify themselves with them. So it's a kind of mind control that's going on, and I think that the proper solution is give these alternative ideas some place in the education system. Not saying give them equal time or anything like that. It's a fact today most scientists accept, for example, the Darwinian theory of evolution and the idea that consciousness is produced by chemicals in the brain, and most scientists accept those ideas today. But there are some who don't. And I think their ideas should be represented as part of the curriculum in a few textbook pages, maybe a few minutes of classroom time, and then let students make up their own minds about these things without being terrified into considering.
Yeah, we don't teach students to think anymore. We don't teach students to think. We teach them what to think, but not how, by giving them just rote information. One of the things I ran into when I was writing my book, I interviewed academic people, neuroscientists and biologists, to back up the neural consequences of belief systems. But when I got into the religious aspect, I wanted to know, well, where does our Judeo-Muslim Christian religions actually come from? And naturally, it led me into pre-Sumerian, Anunnaki, and all that area. And when I interviewed Swami Kriyananda, Yogananda's one of his first pupils,